Hello, everyone. Most of you may know me by now, but for those of you who don't, my name is Anurag Dhawan, and I am the External Relations Officer at the University of Toronto Scarborough. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to yet another session of Hashtag. Moderating alongside, like always, I'm happy to welcome Amelia Helpard, Vice President, Operations for TMG, the marketing group at UTSC. Amelia is a fourth-year student in the MIB program. Her past experience has been in strategy and marketing, and earlier in 2020, she returned from Sydney, Australia after completing a work term and a study abroad term. Before I introduce our speaker for today, a few housekeeping announcements. I request if all attendees can please keep themselves on mute through the session. We will have some time to take questions at the end of the presentation via chat, so if you can please drop your questions there. We are also recording this session, and the recording would be mailed out to all attendees. And now to introduce our special guest for today, Michelle Slater. Michelle is an award-winning marketer with 18 years of leadership experience in strategy development, consulting, and execution within social, digital, and traditional marketing disciplines for both B2B and B2C audiences. As the head of business marketing at Twitter Canada, Michelle works closely with Fortune 100 companies to integrate Twitter into their marketing plans. Prior to joining Twitter, Michelle pioneered social media marketing at RBC. Michelle is an avid runner and volunteers at the Toronto Humane Society. It is my absolute pleasure to have you as our guest on Hashtag Michelle. It's over to you.
Great, thanks. It's really nice to be here today, and thank you very much for having me. I'm going to spend the next, I guess, 90 minutes or so just talking a little bit about marketing at Twitter. I've put up my Twitter handle in a lot of the different slides, and this is a not so subtle ask to give me a follow. And if you are a little shy about asking questions in the chat at the end, you can always just send me a quick note via Twitter. You can find me on LinkedIn as well, just by searching by my name. So thanks again for the really nice, warm welcome. I'm just going to show a little bit about me beyond my bio. So as was said, I'm the head of business marketing at Twitter Canada, and I've been actually with Twitter for about 5 years, but I've been on Twitter personally for just over 12 and a half years. So I was an early adopter of Twitter, and it's quite honestly one of my favorite platforms to use. I like to run. I run a lot, and I'm still running even in the snowy weather. If you give me a follow on Twitter, you'll see lots of pictures of my cat Maisie, as well as some sailing photos. And despite the fact that COVID has really made my passport stance really limited this year, I do love to travel. So that's a little bit about me in a nutshell. And as I said, I'm very, very happy to be here. It goes without saying that this year has been really, really hard, and it's been a very, very strange year. We've seen a lot of people turn to Twitter to share what they're thinking and what they're feeling. And I wanted to kick off this presentation by having a little bit of fun and saying, yeah, it's been hard. A lot of people have struggled, and I give a lot of credit to students because you're probably like me, you know, in your bedroom watching this presentation, or maybe even sharing Wi-Fi with a bunch of different roommates. We know that people have come to Twitter to share what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and kind of how they're coping this year. And there's been some really interesting conversations that have happened on Twitter, whether that's around causes, whether it's been just around funny memes and funny gifs that we see, or even just, you know, some people just wanting to reach out and talk. So when I think about Twitter, I really do think of it as an opportunity to connect with what's happening and to really showcase what you're thinking, what you're feeling, and sharing information that you care about. I'm going to play a short video which gives a bit of an overview of Twitter to get us started. And so, as is said in this video, Twitter is really what's happening in the world and what people are talking about right now. Jack Dorsey, who's the co-founder of Twitter and our current CEO, he says that Twitter is the conversation internet. And when you pause and you think about what does that actually mean, it means really quite a different social platform than some of the other platforms that are out there. And as a marketer, you need to think differently about how you communicate on each of the social media platforms. Matt Kobach, who's one of my favorite follows on Twitter, he talks a lot about social strategy, talks a lot about digital marketing. This is a tweet that he had sent out just over a year ago. And this is how he thinks about the different social media platforms. I did not edit this tweet to take out what Facebook is. This is exactly what he tweeted. I just took a screenshot of it. But I think it's an interesting perspective as a marketer to really realize what the differences are and to stop treating all social platforms the same from a content perspective. So if you think about Twitter as for real time, the conversation a brand would need to have on Twitter is going to be quite a bit different than what they might want to post on LinkedIn or Instagram. And so when we think about Twitter, we really do think of us as a different platform. Twitter is very much a public platform. It's where people go and share openly what they're thinking and what they're feeling, information that they care about, their passions, their interests, and that can be a wide range of things. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm going to talk a lot about running, I'm going to talk about digital marketing, I'm going to talk about Twitter on my Twitter account. But with the holiday season just around the corner, believe me, I'm not sharing what I've been Googling lately because I've actually been searching for Christmas gifts for my brother who lives out in Whistler. And so he follows me on Twitter. Believe me, I'm not going to share holiday inspiration gifts there. And it's also different in terms of how we use Snapchat, Instagram, and Facebook. Those three platforms are very much a look at me platform. It's where you turn the camera around to take a selfie and post that. It's pictures of beauty and aspiration, but it's not so much of information. And we say that Twitter is where you show your authentic self. It's where you're real and unfiltered, versus Instagram is very much a beauty platform. It's where you have a very curated view of what's happening. So as a marketer, when you think about the differences, there is a spot for all social platforms in marketing plans. But when you are communicating on Twitter, you need to keep that mindset of why people are on it and how they're looking at information and how they're sharing. So it's not just me that likes Twitter. I'm, of course, going to talk endlessly about Twitter today, but Josh Hart also thinks it's the best platform. So I wanted to share a quick agenda of what I'm going to talk about with you. I'm going to give you a bit of a state of the nation in terms of where things are at for the digital marketing community right now, and then talk a little bit about how can you stand out? What makes for really memorable marketing, whether it's in a digital space or only on Twitter? And then I talk about two of the reasons why brands use Twitter. One, to launch something new, and the other one is to connect with what's happening. And then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So I'm just going to launch right into the presentation. When you think about the world that we live in today, it is kind of crazy, the fact that there's been more information published in the last few years than has ever been written in time. And it's kind of incredible to think about the access to content that we have, the access to information, the access to just at your fingertips on your mobile device, everything you could possibly want to know, not only in Canada, but around the world. I wish that my screen time was only 5 hours a day. I think that with COVID, we're spending a lot more time on our mobile devices. And my screen report from Apple every week is a little bit of a shaming of maybe you should go outside a bit more. But part of it is because I am consuming a lot more content. And a lot of us are. We're seeing a massive increase in terms of original shows on Netflix, Amazon, Disney Plus, and many, many other opportunities to consume really cool, interesting content. I just watched The Queen's Gambit and I was like, hey, I should get back into chess, but chessboards are sold out everywhere. So I think it's a perfect example of the fact that a lot of us are really leaned into some interesting content that's out there. And the last part, as a marketer, I always think, wow, 10,000 ads a day that we're exposed to. But if you kind of pause and think about the ads that show up in your timeline, the ads you may see on TV, the ads in any type of digital content you're consuming, Or even if you're out for a walk or a drive and you see billboards, there's a lot of ads that we are consuming every single day. And if you sort of pause and you think about what was the best ad you've seen already this week, you've probably seen, I don't know, for most of us, it's probably 15,000 ads. And it might be hard to recall when that gave you joy, maybe made you laugh, or had you had a feeling in mind. And I think a lot of it is because we are so heads down focused on our phones. We also done this study that our attention span is much shorter than a goldfish. This stat always makes me shake my head because a goldfish is, you know, a little pet that a lot of us got for a birthday or maybe some sort of holiday. Potentially had a sad funeral when you were a child and flushed it down the toilet. But a goldfish, their attention span is about 8 seconds. And so I've probably talked just about attention span of goldfish for more than 8 seconds, but for us as humans, it's shorter. And a lot of that is because we are so focused on all this content that's out there. Havas did a study a couple of years ago that came out with a couple of facts. And one is that most content that's created is quite honestly just clutter. 60% of content created is just clutter. And this next slide, you can see the stat here is that almost 90% isn't noticed or remembered at all. And so as a marketer and a digital marketer at that, I always see this stat and I think, gosh, I work so hard to create content, but no one's remembering it and it's not breaking through. This is a funny tweet I saw. It's a parody account for Adweek. Very, very funny account to follow. And of course, nobody actually is at a bar right now. But if we were, no one's actually talking about their favorite pop-up ad unit. And it goes back to my earlier point that it's hard for us to remember an ad. Usually it's something that has an emotional trigger. It's funny. It's something that brings back a memory for us. But quite honestly, a lot of the content that's created does not break through. The other thing, which is even more challenging, is that there's no gatekeepers to the public conversation anymore. It used to be back in the 80s and even early 90s, you could spend millions of dollars as a brand and go out with this super cool TV buy, flood every single network, and tell people what your brand stood for. If any of you watched Mad Men back in the heyday of Madison Avenue, that was what they did. Now, they did create some really amazing ads, so I'm not going to say that they didn't have great work back then, but it was easier to be able to break through. Now we have regular people like Nathan Apodaca, who is this cool selfie video he took and posted on TikTok of like singing along to Dreams by Fleetwood Mac and drinking cranberry cocktail from Ocean Spray. That video was crazy in terms of how cool it was and how it really quickly became a viral video. And Ocean Spray saw that and jumped in, and the CEO of Ocean Spray actually did a bit of a same video of that and published it out from TikTok. But we're also seeing, brands not quite understanding that the public now owns what your brand stands for. Recent controversy with Sherwin-Williams, where one of their employees was, again, creating TikTok videos where they had these super cool paint patterns, and he actually got fired for that. So, I look at this as a brand marketer and I think this is really exciting. Everyone could be talking about my brand, but at the same time, the brand reputation can change instantly. So as a brand marketer, you can look at this as you can stick your head in the sand and, say, oh, I don't know what else to do. Or you can actually do something about it. And I'm going to show one of my favorite commercials. This is from the Super Bowl this past year from Google. And I do apologize that this hopefully doesn't make you cry, but I will just play this video.
Hey Google, show me photos of me and Loretta. Remember, Loretta hated my mustache. Remember, Loretta loved going to Alaska and scallops. Show me photos from our anniversary. Remember, she always snorted when she laughed. Play our favorite movie. Remember, I'm the luckiest man in the world. Come on, boy.
So I love that commercial, but really and truly what Google is talking about is their ability to kind of help you remember your memories, but it's search engine at the end of the day. And it's something that, you know, Alexa exists like this as well. So there's not a, you know, it's a service that isn't exciting. It's not cool. It's not sexy. It's not the latest pair of Nikes, but yet they're still able to really capture emotion in a really meaningful way. And so these are some of the reactions that people had about this video. And I think that it's quite fascinating to think of a commercial that plays during Super Bowl. People turn to their second screen, Twitter, and are tweeting all these incredible comments about it, including the funny memes. And so this is the power of great creative. It's the power of really understanding what works and how emotion can play in a meaningful way to create content that cuts through. This is definitely not going to fall into that 90% of clutter stat that I had mentioned earlier. Mint Mobile, who's actually, I think, owned partly by Ryan Reynolds. He's one of the best marketers out there, not just a great actor, but also phenomenal marketer. He always is up to something really creative on Twitter. And here he is talking about the announcement of Mint Mobile and, you know, shared it on Twitter, but he took out a newspaper ad, like an actual print newspaper in the New York Times, which I thought was actually kind of interesting. And then one of my favorite in Canada created this little tweet at the beginning of the pandemic with a hand washing timer. It's just to count down to 20 seconds how long actually you should take to wash your hands. Very simple, interesting, creative that is very, very memorable. And so I read a lot of the Madison Avenue ad guys. I read a lot of their bios, and if you're looking for something to read over the holidays, I strongly suggest that you look at Leo Burnett or Ogilvy's bio. You can come up with all kinds of really interesting insights from them. But I love this quote because it's so true, is that products are made in the factory, but brands are created in the mind. So of course, for me, working at Twitter, is our product is not made in a factory, it's made by engineers, but how people perceive Twitter and how they think about it is really created in how we go to market. I'm going to talk about 3 ways to stand out with examples of how we do that at Twitter. So the first is by being very customer centric. And there's ways you can use Twitter to actually understand what the public is thinking and what they're feeling. So as I mentioned earlier, Twitter is very public. What you tweet is seen by millions and millions of people around the world, and every single tweet is viewable and searchable. So that means that what I tweet could be seen by someone in Tasmania, it could be seen by someone in India, it could be seen by someone in Malaysia. It's also the largest publicly available archive of human thought to have ever existed. I think of back, I used to have to go and find stuff on microfiches. Now I can actually figure out what people are thinking and what they're feeling about a brand simply by doing a search on Twitter. And so this is a really powerful thing, is that even though a tweet is only 280 characters, it has a lot of different data elements. And as a marketer, I find this really compelling because I can go deep into what people are thinking, what trends are happening, feeling, how they are interacting with competitors. It's really great for competitive insight simply by doing some analysis of data. And so what this basically shows is a cluster of different words and to segment an audience. So how this graph works is you can see that in cluster 1, we have hardcore Jays fans, and they do not overlap with MMA and WWE. There's very few overlaps with that. So if you want to reach one versus the other, how do you do this in a meaningful way? And we actually took this one step further and created a word cloud around the term and feeling of sports. And so that brought us into all kinds of areas. Plus, on the right, you can see the little avatars for the most relevant accounts related to sports on Twitter. So, of course, the Raptors and the Jays in Toronto come up as some of the biggest terms used around sports, but so is gamer, so is Ottawa, so is rock, and so is Edmonton. So if you look at this from a brand perspective, you want to reach someone who cares about sports, how does that also overlay if you're a beer company? So we did this, and this is real stats from, it was a couple of years ago we did this, for one of our major clients in Canada, and they wanted to understand, what are Canadians talking about? So we know they're talking about sports. We know they're talking about the Jays and the Raptors, but they're also talking a lot about beer. 2.2 million tweets about beer. And so if you're a brand that's selling beer, what is it that then has that intersection? So we dug deeper and found out that people who are talking about Bud Light, they over-index in terms of music events and sporting events. But if you're trying to sell Heineken, they don't talk about Heineken and music together. So that's not an interesting overlay of data. But Bud Light took this and went, oh, well, why don't we double down in terms of how we connect with sporting event conversations and music events? Because there's already this natural intersection of interests. And so this is an example of what Bud Light actually did. So they did this funny little tweet of people curling with a six-pack. It's a very fun use of creative. But they also did a dive bar tour with Post Malone. Again, understanding that the conversation of Bud Light and music has this beautiful intersection. And when you think about this as an example, we know that all this data that exists out of the billions of tweets that are sent regularly, so I think it's over 500 million tweets every single day. Start to do the quick math in terms of what that number looks like for the last 14 years. There is so much data out there that it has almost limitless application. And I think that's really exciting for how to understand how to reach your customer, what they care about in a very creative way. So I don't want to pick on Kanye, but this is an old tweet from 2016, but it's just perfect for this next section. I want to talk about why it's so important to be honest and authentic in the marketing approach, especially because people have the most powerful computer in their pocket on their smartphone. So Kanye tweeted this out. I have no idea what he's talking about at the time, but this is how people feel when they read something that is not authentic from a brand. So at Twitter, we're really raw and unfiltered. We like to embrace the quirkiness of our brand. And because it is such an open platform, we read and see what everybody thinks about Twitter. So what we did as a marketing campaign about a year ago is we went and we dug for all the tweets we could find that were basically Twitter is. And so you can see some really funny tweets here. It's a vast wonderland of sports nerds. It's a party that everybody claims to hate but won't leave. It's the greatest sports bar ever. It's a lunchroom whose table y'all sitting at. Twitter's a playground and it's always recess. But quite honestly, my favorite one, and especially because I live in downtown Toronto, is that Twitter is garbage and I'm a raccoon. And so we dug up all these tweets and we decided, wouldn't it be fun to show everybody what Twitter is and use the words of regular people on Twitter to showcase the fun and quirky side of Twitter. So what we did is we had a subway takeover, we had these wild post strings out in the world, we had massive, massive billboard space that we shared these tweets. These are not by verified users. These are people like you and me who are just tweeting out there. We painted tweets on the sidewalk, and we did a pop-up candy shop as well, because we saw a lot of people tweeting that, you know, Twitter is yum, or Twitter's like a candy shop. So why don't we bring that to life in a meaningful way? But Twitter didn't stop there. We also saw this meme that was going around last summer where it was me on Twitter versus me on Instagram. And everybody was tweeting pictures of this really, really funny comparisons. And so we thought, why don't we do something with this and really play into the fact that Twitter is so raw and unfiltered. It's such a great creative space, and it is very, very different. This one always makes me laugh. Whenever I see it, I look at that horse on the left and I'm like, oh, such beautiful hair. But the one on the right, I think, is honestly how most of us feel every day. And so we also went and posted those in major cities in the United States. So Valentine's Day happened, and we thought, why don't we look into what dating Twitter is all about? And we also did the same type of thing where we took real people's tweets and we put them out there in the world for people to interact with and to respond to. So it's a way for us to market ourselves in a really authentic and meaningful way, and kind of, you know, have a bit of a joke on ourselves too. And this is something that Twitter did again this year around Black Lives Matter. We did one in the UK in London around Halloween, which was really fun. And it will be something that we continue to do as to how we market ourselves in a very real, honest, and authentic way. I talked a little bit about emotion and how emotion drives this, like, if you have an emotional reaction, it's something that you remember. And as a brand, you want to have a place in someone's brain, right? So when you're in front of all the toothpaste at Shoppers Drug Mart, you're like, oh yeah, I picked Crest because I remember this, blah, 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 blah. There's a reason why we buy. And Zig Ziglar, this quote from him is that we like to think we're rational. We like to think we're logical. We really like to think that we base our decisions on math. But quite honestly, most of us buy for emotional reasons. There's a reason why some of you are Samsung fans, some of you are iPhone fans. And really and truly, the phones are quite similar. But you buy because there's an emotional response triggered to how you perceive that object, whether it's a service that you purchase or it's an actual product that you take home. And so I'm going to show you two examples of basically the same thing. One is from Dropbox and the other one is from Google. It is around a software sharing platform. Basically, they do the same thing, but I'm going to just show you two different ways that they've marketed their product.
Okay, team, we've got a pitch to win. I want everyone working together on this. So let's start a Dropbox paper doc. I'll set it up. It's shared. Ben, you're presenting, so you get to choose the title. Could you add the points from the slide we presented last week? Perfect. Nice formatting. Steph, I loved your designs. Can you drop some in? Ooh, that one is great. Make it bigger. What do we think about this as a soundtrack? Too slow? What about this? Okay, a lot to do here. Better delegate. Edwin, you okay to handle that? And Steph, all good from your end? Nice. Okay, now let's drop in all of the other files we need.
Okay, I'm just gonna, in the interest of time, go to the next one.
Oh, here she comes. She's a scary lady. She's an angry tiger. She's a man gobbler. Eater. She's a man eater. Oh, here she comes. Watch out, boy. She'll chew you up. Oh, here she comes.
So I often will ask, like, which one do you prefer? I know it's hard to do in this format, but I think most of us gravitate to the second one, even though Dropbox is like really cool. It goes through all the different things you can do. And quite honestly, I had no idea you could do all of that. Whereas Google is like to the point, it's a lot more memorable because it makes you kind of like sing along to that old song, makes you smile. And so it's something that emotion is really what we say is the core currency for communication. And so when you're trying to cut through, and you're trying to be memorable with your marketing and trying to take up space in this massive clutter of content, there's three things that we talk about at Twitter all the time. One is to truly understand your customer and understand what they care about, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, how they think about your competitors, how do they spend their day. And a lot of that information can come from Twitter. The next is to be honest and authentic with your communication, because quite honestly, if you're not doing that, and especially for you as marketing students, you really need to be authentic because you'll get called on it by the public. And then the last, and probably the hardest one to actually be able to capture as a marketer, is having this emotion as the core of everything that you communicate. So I am going to switch gears and talk a little bit about, well, how do you actually do this? So I've talked about what Twitter is. I've talked about the world that we're operating in right now, that it's confusing, it's cluttered, we're distracted, we have low attention span. I've given you 3 ways to be able to connect in a meaningful way. Now I'm going to talk about, well, how do you actually do this, and how do you use Twitter effectively if you're looking at launching something new? And when we talk about launch, we talk about this 48-hour interest window. And some people would actually say it's a lot shorter than 48 hours. So McDonald's just announced on Twitter that the McRib is back. And I follow their account and I was like, why do they keep talking about McRib? And this is about maybe a month or so ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, where there's a little sprinkling of them being kind of tongue in cheek about, social media manager, everybody just wants to know when McRib is back. And I was like, I bet you they're going to launch before the holidays. And then they did. And so they created this spark, this interest that people were like chit-chatting about on Twitter. And then, of course, they did launch. And there's been this massive spike in terms of the conversation of McRib, the surge in conversation. So I think what's kind of fascinating is that as a brand, when you want to launch something, whether it's bringing back an old product, whether it's a new campaign, it could be a new brand, you have to create this spark, conduct it, and then ride the surge. And how do you actually do that? How do you fuel the conversation? Well, what we'd look at Twitter is that when news breaks, people go to Twitter first. So I've mentioned I live in Toronto. Yesterday, I was like, something weird just happened. And I went to Twitter and I was like, fireball? And I guess a meteor came very close to Toronto and it lit up the sky. So I went there first. I went there before I went to any of the news outlets like CP24, which is always very fast breaking news, because I wanted to find out what was going on. So people go to Twitter because they want to find out. News breaks first. We also know that the individuals on Twitter are generally what we call more influential. And we look at those early adopters, the people who have big followers, they pick up the story and they run with it. And then the regular people like us then are like, oh, mass discovery. So that's when brands can reveal what is actually going on and then reinforce that with paid advertising. So that Twitter offers do help in this cycle of how to actually have a really effective launch. And we did other research at Twitter that only 1 in 17 launches are actually successful. And if you think about this, when you get into your marketing jobs after school, you need to think about like, hey, when you invest so much money and so much product expertise and so much marketing, you really need that launch to work. And you need it to work in a really meaningful way. And so this is just a couple of opportunities that Twitter offers with our product suite to make that come to life. I'm not going to go deep into the products today, but I will show how they come to life in a number of the case studies that I'll profile in just a couple of minutes. So when we talk about listening, back to earlier when I said that Twitter has the largest library of human thought in history, you can go through Twitter and do all kinds of searching, whether you do it on TweetDeck, which is a free tool, or you actually use the search functionality on Twitter. But you can gather key insights that will help to build a strategy and really help to build creative. So we know that many, many people in Canada have been talking about frontline workers. And this has been a conversation that's been going on since the beginning of the pandemic. So when this brand, I'm sure many of you have heard of, it's a skincare brand called CeraVe. When they wanted to tease out their campaign, they thought, wouldn't this be interesting to align with a moment in time that is happening called National Nurses Day. And it's also intersecting with something that many, many, many people care about, of giving back to the frontline workers. And how can they, in a natural and authentic way, target individuals who care about nurses and who care about frontline. And so what they did is they went into what we call this influential early engagers, and they targeted these people who have already been talking about frontline workers, who may be a nurse and sharing about what their face looks like at the end of the day after wearing a mask all day, and how could they feel authentic in how they brought that to life. So this is their campaign. They launched it. They wanted to celebrate nurses on National Nurses Day. They had what we call a promoted trend, which when you go into the timeline on Twitter, it's the very first thing that you see. So thank you, nurses. And it drives to a tweet to talk about more. It gives this breakthrough opportunity to have what we call an outsized impact on a very large and mass audience. So this is for the mass awareness when you want to launch and get everyone to know all about your campaign. And then the next thing is to sustain. So you don't want it to just be like, hey, one hit wonder. You want it to be something that people talk about. And so what they did is they did a fun little quiz, true and false, about, some skincare tips and how to actually like wash your face properly. And this helps to what we call maintain buzz. It keeps the brand top of mind throughout the campaign period. And so this is really simple, little fun quiz. We all love quizzes. I don't know how many BuzzFeed quizzes I've taken recently, but even on Twitter, they're really, really fun of answering these simple questions of true and false. So that was one strategy that happened just this past year. I'm going to talk about one from the UK, which I think is maybe a little bit more fun. So a lot of us enjoy KFC, and a lot of us think that they have awful fries. But really what KFC wanted to do in the UK and Ireland, and this was what the strategy was that they presented to Twitter as the challenge of, hey, we want to launch our new fries and let people know that they're better than the old ones, so come in and try them. And so what they did is they first looked at all the tweets that were happening, and there were 11 million tweets about KFC fries. And so that's awesome. It's like, oh, cool, there's already interest in fries at KFC. But when they dug deeper into it, they realized that no one loves these fries. Basically, the tweets are pretty much all like this. How can they be so good at chicken and so bad at fries? And it just continues, like calling them crap fries. And it really was really quite fascinating. So what they did is they dug a little bit deeper, and they wanted to find out what people liked and what they didn't like. So the most preferred KFC new fries were home style or crinkle coated and not standard. So all the stuff at the bottom, the existing fries, which were least preferred, these are some of the attributes they had. So what KFC did is they owned it. And they said, you know what? No one likes it. We get it. And not only did they take all of these awful tweets, but they actually promoted them. So what that means is that KFC paid money to Twitter to promote tweets that basically said your fries are awful. And man, that stands out because most brands are like, oh, let's make the conversation go away. Whereas KFC said, you know what, we get it. We know you don't like them, but we're going to fix it. And all these people started to respond back going like, WTF, or well, this is weird. Which is kind of the normal response because why would a brand be promoting negative tweets? And Burger King got in the conversation and even said, hey, like weird flex, but okay. And they took out of home as well, which is like no one likes your fries. And at the bottom, you can see new fries coming soon. So it generated a tremendous amount of interest because it was something they found out on Twitter. They went out with a campaign on Twitter to promote negative tweets. They took out billboard ads and print ads. So of course, then they're going to be like, hey, so this is what we're doing. They've got a short video, which is our best practices, a 6-second video. This is 10, but it's really quite simple. It's eye-catching. And what were the results? So we saw earlier there were 11 million tweets about KFC fries, and they got within 4 days 500,000 engagements. So not just, you know, a tweet about it, is people engaging with the tweet. So a like, a retweet, a comment. And 7 times more mentions of KFC fries on Twitter compared to the previous year. So back to cutting through the clutter and cutting through and having something that's memorable. They owned this. They're really honest and authentic. They came up with great creative. And when you want to do a launch, you want people talking about what you're launching. And so this article, I think, sums it up, is that this woman's tweet may have helped change the recipe. How awesome is that? So everybody's a lot happier in the end. Okay, so I'm going to talk next about connecting to what's happening. And when we think about what's happening, a lot is surely happening in the world. We know that people come to Twitter as a second screen. I do not watch The Bachelor or The Bachelorette, but quite honestly, I'll be on Twitter when it's on and I will die laughing at the tweets because it's actually more fun than just sitting at home by myself watching it on TV. This tweet, I think, sums it up, is that Twitter is the best thing to happen to sports since someone flipped a helmet upside down and filled it with nachos. We know that TV and Twitter go together really, really well, and especially since we're all, you know, very socially distanced. We're not going to concerts anymore. We're not going to see the Jays play. We're not going to watch the Leafs lose yet again. And I am like a diehard Leafs fan. It breaks my heart to even say that. But Twitter is where you can congregate with the other rabid fans, with people who love your favorite band just as much as you do, and you can cheer along and you can roar. Roar of the stadium is what we say Twitter is. And so, you know, Twitter in sports is magical. When anything happens, the conversation spikes on Twitter. But we also know that entertainment is also tremendous conversation on Twitter. So back to the fact that there's, you know, between 500 million and 1 billion tweets every single day, you know, 3 and 8% of them is a massive number of tweets that are sent out every single day. And to put that in perspective, it's about 25 tweets per second about entertainment. And entertainment, of course, is a broad gamut of things. It's music, it's film, it's art, but it's all the stuff that we all love watching and engaging with. This tweet also makes me laugh. Of spending all day on Twitter while watching TV constitutes hard work. I need to rewrite my resume. I guess for me, I'm allowed to be on Twitter all the time because I actually work there, but this just makes me laugh. We also know that when people are watching TV, they're often looking at their phone, and that Twitter is where they're actually putting their eyeballs. It's the preferred social platform when watching TV because Twitter is real time. It's back to what I was saying earlier of where news breaks. And so whether it's this like amazing play in the NBA, and we've seen so many of those things happen with the Raptors, and then all the comments that happen. Twitter is honestly the place to be to connect with what's happening. Or it could be around the MTV Awards. And if you caught it this year, Lady Gaga was unbelievable to watch. So the comments are always epic whenever she's on stage. Pop perfection for sure. So we actually dug a little bit deeper into this at Twitter and thought, well, what is it that's so interesting? And people, of course, talk about it, that Twitter is actually the best part of the VMAs. But we've also know in real time that on the mainstream platforms, so generally on TV, viewership is down. But viewership is not down on Twitter. The conversation actually more than doubled in 2020 versus 2019. So, you know, an increase of 145% is not something to take lightly. So if you're a brand that wants to connect with the music conversation, to what Bud Light did in the earlier example I showed with Post Malone and their dive bar tour, well, like maybe they should be involved in this conversation as well. And so Twitter does give that opportunity to connect in real time with what people care about, to care about with people's passions, their interests, gaming, whether it's music, whether it's basketball, you name it. There are people out there in the world that care about what's happening at that point in time. And so we know that there are different ways to be able to connect during an event. Super Bowl is coming up in, I guess it's a couple of months now, for usually the first weekend of February. Super Bowl Sunday is really a big deal. And for a brand that wants to connect with one of the biggest sports conversations in the world on Super Bowl Sunday, they are competing with a lot of other brands, a lot of other people talking. But you can hype it up ahead of time. And this is an example that we'd pulled together for an upcoming, for the Grammys, actually. So Grammy announcements happened last week. The Weeknd tweeted out, I think his tweet got, I want to say close to 500,000 likes, that he was basically cheated and he should have been nominated, but he wasn't. So he basically tweeted out like, I was cheated, the Grammys are corrupt. That reaction was crazy, but as a brand, it's an opportunity to engage in the conversation with music lovers. You can talk about all these things ahead of the actual event so that you're not just coming at one day wonder. You can keep that conversation living throughout this cycle of like of interest, and then the surge, and then sustain is what we call it. So think of this whenever you're considering your marketing campaigns with your school assignments, and then when you're actually out working, of how do you keep this momentum going by hyping it up, participating in the conversation in real time, and then reacting to what's actually happening. When we did analysis of the conversation for Super Bowl last year, we saw on Super Bowl Sunday, it was high. There's no getting around the fact that Super Bowl Sunday is always quite high. But the number of tweets, the number of engagements, the number of impressions that happened on Super Bowl Sunday, it was equal to the amount of conversation leading up to and after the Super Bowl. So for brands that only participated in that one Sunday, they missed out on another 50% of the conversation by not being connected to the opportunity before and after. And so I'm going to show an example of Bud Light. And this was done during the NFL draft that happened earlier this year. So the NFL draft happened for the very first time in a pandemic setting. It meant that they did this all from home, but Bud Light wanted to participate in, you know, the conversation that was going on. It's a big conversation on Twitter, but also knowing that everybody wants to boo the commish. Like, this is just common in the NFL. So what they did is they came to Twitter with this really fun campaign. This is their first tweet. I didn't count characters. I'm sure they used up all of them with it. And then what they did is they reached out and they tweeted We need more boos. Like this tweet for a reminder to boo the commish when the draft starts on Thursday. And not only were they going to do this for fun, but they'd also give $1 to the NFL Draft-a-thon up to $500K. So really great. And awesome way to be able to get the brand out there of Bud Light Seltzer, which is, I think, a relatively new product that Bud Light's come up with. So had 3.5 million views, which is pretty incredible.
Traditions are important, now more than ever. And while I considered skipping this one, Bud Light reminded me it just wouldn't be the same.
Yeah, there you go.
So not only did they go out with this message, they actually had a video with the commissioner in it, and he understands everyone's booing him. But actually, again, back to being honest and authentic, they brought that to life in a meaningful way and owned it, which I think you have to give them a ton of credit for being so open about that. They ended up being the second trending topic, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. The NFL draft is a massive conversation on Twitter, and to be trending number 2 above everything else, above some of the players, you can see even above Chase Young, is really quite impressive for this campaign. And I also really like the fact that, you know, Roger Goodell, the commissioner, he's a good sport about this and participating in the Bud Light video. And here are some of the tweets that people talked about as well. So they had not only the Like to Remind that came out a couple of days before the draft, they were live during the draft and then interacted with individuals. Tons and tons of great commentary, of huge credit and love to Bud Light for such a fun campaign. And it came in a moment of time when we all needed a little bit of levity. We needed something to laugh at, especially since the NFL draft usually takes place on TV alone. And here he is, you know, everyone's at home in their living room, in their bedroom, their home office, the basement, wherever it is they're working, and still engaged in the conversation in a very meaningful way. I'm going to switch gears and talk a little bit about how to connect not just with a moment in time, but to actually connect with a conversation. And this was with HBO and the 20th anniversary of The Sopranos. So what they wanted to do, and this was the challenge statement they brought to Twitter, how do you celebrate the 20th anniversary in a way that is entertaining and engaging? So how do you cut through the clutter? How do you cut through all the other content that's out there and remind people of how fun The Sopranos is? So this is what they did. They did a lot of planning ahead of time with their social team. And I don't know how many people they had working their social war room, but basically they tweeted out, I'm handing out Soprano nicknames today. And if you, I know my Twitter handle is my first name, but if you don't use your real name for your Twitter handle, then just tell them and they'll come back. So such a cool opportunity at the beginning of the year. And so Jack, the CEO of Twitter, responded like, hey, I've got my hand up. It's just a little emoji with his first name, Jack. And they came back with this, again, interesting little creative. It's not just in tweet copy. It's in a little photo of Jackie No Edits. So quite funny. As everybody knows, Twitter does not allow edits. Doesn't matter how many grammatical or spelling mistakes you make, no edits on the platform. But it's really quite hilarious. So Roger Federer, and their response back of like, no, you're the feds. So just awesome. So what a great way to be able to bring back a show that's 20 years old and to get people talking about it right now. The other thing is that they had a really high response to people who reached out. So 95% of people who received their name actually retweeted it. So the power of marketing and the power of good marketing is third party. And so, yes, they had a paid promotion to get it started and to get it rolling. But then all these people then retweeted it out to just amplify the message in a really fun and authentic way. This is my last example, actually, and you may have actually seen this one because it's gotten a lot of publicity. But here's Thea. She's on a dating app. I don't know which one it is, but here's a little selfie of her looking quite beautiful in this very, very pretty pink dress. And this is the DM that she got back. So people are kind of mean to each other. But basically, this guy says, "You're a bit of a joke, but that dress in the last photo is not doing any favors." So like she never asked for a commentary on what she looked like. He's like, I had to tell you, else I wouldn't be able to sleep. So it's awful. So I'm like, seriously, this person to do that and send this back to her, even though she does look quite beautiful. So this went crazy on Twitter. She tweeted this out and people responded back and basically thought, this is insane. So this is her actual tweet of the conversation, plus a picture of her in her dress. And the responses that she got were really the love of Twitter came out. "I love the dress, you look amazing," is one of the best ones, I think. But it's not just that. The shop that she bought it from, an online retailer, reached out and said, "Here's to find our perfect match." And then they want to talk to her. So this is actually from a brand. So smart marketers at this brand paying attention to the conversation on Twitter, seeing something that's trending in real time and then reacting in the moment. It makes all the difference in the world, because what happened is truly spectacular from this. Is not only did she get a response from the brand, she then became a model on their website, which is unbelievable that they did this. So really quite impressive response to Thea from ASOS. And believe me, seeing this makes you want to buy from this brand, but I'm sure she's going to be a loyal shopper for life. So it's all great. It's a really lovely story, but I'm a brand marketer, but I also have business objectives, and so I also have to put in some numbers. So it got 40% more retweets than every single tweet from ASOS in 2019. So if you think about that, one post, it's unbelievable how this thing went viral. It went viral in a very positive way, in a way that is honest, authentic, it's emotional, it's memorable. And it's because they were looking at the power of the social data that's out there from Twitter. Smart marketers of this brand that really jumped in and responded in a way that is truly authentic and that people loved. So when I think about Twitter and I think about, the reason to exist and what gets me out of bed every morning, is because I want people to say these things about my work. I want them to, tweet with the heart emoji, or say, "This is genius," or "brilliant," or "so cool." And I'm hoping that my presentation today inspired you with a couple of ways to think about Twitter quite differently. That Twitter is where you can find out information about your customers, so that your marketing is going to be very centered in what your customers care about, what they're thinking, and what they're feeling. That you need to embrace being honest and authentic, because if you aren't, you'll instantly be called out on it. And third is that emotion is at the core of all great communication. And that Twitter can be part of that, for whether it's launching a new product or a new brand or a new campaign, or to connect with what's happening in terms of a real-time event like the NFL draft, connecting with a conversation about, Sopranos and that show, or connecting with something that's just like popped up, like Thea and her beautiful dress. So I'm going to just turn it over for questions. And I'm hoping that there are a few. We've got about minutes or so. But I am here definitely to answer any questions that you have.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Oh, my.
I'm going to stop. Do you want me to stop presenting? Would that be helpful?
I'm not sure what. Am I still echoing?
I think you're good now, Amelia.
Okay, I'm so sorry about that. All right. So we do have a few questions coming up in the chat for you, Michelle. So first of all, would you agree in saying that Twitter rewards honesty, authenticity, and most importantly, self-awareness for people and brands alike more than any other platform? This kind of, Armand pointed out that this seems to be the huge strength or point of difference of Twitter.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Twitter is where we say you bring your real and authentic self. It's where you post really what you're feeling in that moment in time. It's also where we've seen conversations spark. We've seen that Twitter is kind of like the campfire that the world gathers around to have a conversation about something that matters. So it's where the Me Too movement sparked and caught on fire. It's where Black Lives Matter also sparked and tremendously changed how we think and how we're acting, not only this year in 2020, but in previous years. So Twitter, I think, is where those real and authentic conversations are happening. We know that, this is an old example, but Arab Spring that happened in Egypt, that was because of Twitter. And so whether it's a conversation about a dress or it's a conversation about political change or a conversation about movement, Twitter is where people go to gather to talk about that in a very raw and real way.
Amazing. Yeah, you definitely brought that to light in your presentation. So I think the next question that we have from Angela is, what has the impact been on Twitter's recent decision to fact check, whether it's been about the pandemic or the US elections? What's been the impact from that?
Yeah, great question. I actually was attending an all hands this morning, so we talked about that actually in our all hands. My opinion is that I think it's important that real information is being shared. Twitter has always sort of walked this line of freedom of speech is really centered with everything we believe in, and what the founders started Twitter as an opportunity to talk with every single person around the world in a way that had never existed before. So when we talk about that quote I had at the beginning, Jack saying that Twitter is the conversational layer of the internet, it is a very, very different conversation on Twitter than what's happening on a website. And so when we think about what that meant for us, especially this year and given the US election and the pandemic, we wanted to make sure that misinformation was not spread and that Twitter is not part of that. We wanted still people to have the freedom of speech to be able to share their opinions and their thoughts in a way that was true to what they were thinking, but that misinformation that was clearly incorrect and clearly wrong. And that's, to me, different than freedom of speech. So freedom of speech means I can say anything I want, but as a public figure, if I'm saying that, the pandemic doesn't exist, then that needs to be highlighted. Twitter's made a lot of changes to its policy. It's been a lot of tough conversations, and we're still making updates to it to make sure that the platform is safe for all people who want to be on it. And that means that we will put up interstitials, that we will put up information to make it more clear for people who are on Twitter and that they want to be educated. It's a work in progress. We're not perfect at this. I don't know if we ever will be, but it is definitely a step in the right direction. It's taken a lot of time and effort with our engineering team to be able to bring this to life. But I'm really proud of the company that they've taken a stand and they've actually started to do something to make sure that every person around the world has access to information that is actually truthful. And again, there's still problems with it. I won't ever lie and say, oh, it's perfect, because it won't ever be. But at least the action is there to make it a better experience for everyone on Twitter.
Wow, that's amazing. It's pretty impressive to see, how far you guys have come on that front. The next question for Armand is, would love to know what you think about the controversial 280 character limit. A lot of people think it's the perfect promotion of snackable content, but some disagree. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for asking it. So we used to only be 140 characters, and I'll just a little small history lesson on Twitter. Is when Jack and Ev and Biz started Twitter. Those are the three co-founders. They came up with 140 characters because it was basically the length of an SMS message at that time, and then they wanted to make sure there'd be enough space for like a username as well. And then we quickly realized that if you add in an image and then or a link to a website or a couple of hashtags, or you want to tag a bunch of people, quickly 140 characters disappears. And so we extended the DM function so it would be much longer, and then thought, well, why don't we just extend the actual message, the tweet length, to be 280 characters. So bluntly, not many people use it. We've seen about 5% of people on Twitter use the 280 characters. Most tweets are between 80 and 100 characters in length, and that's our recommendation to brands as well, as short and sweet, a simple message, one key message per tweet with a great image or a video or a GIF is what works best. So although there's more space for people to use, most people don't use it. And the other thing to keep in mind is that for anyone who speaks a different language besides English, and I'm sure there's a lot of people on this video call that do speak a second language. I speak a little bit of French and just a smidge of German, like just enough to read a menu. And for anyone who speaks, a Latin language, the space that English takes up is here, and the space that French takes up is here. German is even more. And so when we think about Twitter being accessible to all people around the world, you need more room to say the same thing in a different language. And so it was also to help with accessibility with language barriers that people may have been facing due to the fact that, hey, the tweet length is so short. When we first came out with 280 characters, a lot of brands had a lot of fun with it. NASA did a really awesome one, which was basically using little emojis of all the different planets and taking up the 280 characters. Cookie Monster, also one of a favorite follow for me, just for a laugh during the day. He tweeted out just all these like little chocolate chip cookie emojis. So we do see some brands taking advantage of it, but quite honestly, the vast majority of people do stick with short messages and short tweets.
Okay, that definitely makes a lot of sense. And the language barrier is really interesting. That's something that I hadn't thought about before. Another question that we have in the chat is just on kind of like the data that Twitter offers to brands and companies. Is it mainly kind of focused around the marketing campaigns, or are there also kind of recommendations on how to create trends on the site?
Yeah, so we've got a couple of different ways that you can access information and data. And again, all of the information is publicly accessible data. So this is nothing to do with privacy of information. It's all public available info on Twitter. So we don't share like friend information or telephone numbers or anything like that. It's all publicly accessible. So when you have your Twitter bio, and if you look at mine, you can easily see that, from my photo that I identify as this, she, her, that I live in Toronto, that I like certain things, like I like running, I like marketing, I work in a digital space. But you can also see that where I tweet from, if I tag my tweets with location identifiers, that I do move around a bit. Like I'm in New York again, I'm really missing travel, but pre-pandemic I was in New York a lot. And so all of that information is definitely available. So just a caveat, it's public available information. When you're going into the ads UI, so that's the ads user interface, when you can actually promote ads on Twitter, there are many, many different areas for you to target tweets to individuals. So you can target tweets based on keywords that they use, whether it's keywords in the bio or in tweets, and that includes hashtags. It could be around interests. So again, sports, basketball, you name it. And there's many, many, many different types of interests. We also have it around big events. So we often have brands that want to target people who are interested in the Toronto International Film Festival. And so we make it easy to be able to target those big groups. You can also segment individuals by male or female, by age group. And again, it's a bit of It's a fuzzy one on the age group because Twitter doesn't ask for age when you open up your profile. So it's only if people have put in their birth date in their profile. By location, which is obviously very important, not only from a nationality perspective, so Canada versus the US, but also in Canada by province. And by language, so English, French. And there are a number of other different parameters. The thing with our targeting capabilities is not just one or the other, but you could actually target, and again, I just use myself as an example, but I could be served up an ad in my timeline, which is very applicable to me. And that could be, a person who works in technology, who's interested in marketing, who lives in Toronto, and hey, wouldn't that be cool that I attend a conference to learn more about digital marketing, particularly in a tech space. And so those are, it can be very broad for targeting, or it can be very narrow depending on what who you want to reach. And what we recommend from an optimization perspective is you start with a couple of different target groups. So that could be, group A, B, C, D, and then you have different creatives for your actual Twitter ads and put them in the system and let them optimize. And usually within 24 hours, you can find out what is the best performing ad unit, as well as the best performing target group in terms of driving what your key performance indicators are. So for some brands, KPIs are really around engagement, which would be likes, retweets, comments, or it could just be around impressions. So again, it depends on what you're trying to do, but the Twitter team is always there to help set that up. And if you've got more information, or you're looking for more information around how our ads work, you can always go to Flight School, Twitter Flight School, or business.twitter.com. And both of those websites have tons of information on how the ads UI works.
Awesome. We have quite a few more questions here. So the next one is, for companies with small marketing budgets and manpower, how would you advise them to pick their social channels that they market on? And would that be different for B2B versus B2C?
Yeah, so the first thing I always do, and I think at the very beginning in my bio, it said that I pioneered social media at RBC. So when I started that job, there's just me and one other person, honestly, for all of social media for the biggest company in Canada. So we had to be really careful about what we said and where we said it, because we didn't have any other people to do it. And I didn't want to work all the time. I work a lot, but I didn't want to work all the time. So what we did is, and this is my strong recommendation to anyone who's looking at whether it's enhancing your personal brand in social media, or if you're running marketing for a volunteer group and social media marketing, or you're tasked with running the social accounts, is start by listening. Start by, if you know who your target audience is you want to reach, then start by listening to where are those people? Where are they engaging? Where are they talking? Where are they leaned into the conversation? And so for certain brands, Twitter might be the very best and only choice. It might be the spot that you want to go because that's where everybody is. That's where you can reach 100% of your audience because they're already on there and they're very leaned into the conversation. For other brands, you may need to think about Twitter Plus, and Twitter Plus, another network, another platform. But the best thing is to just start by listening, finding out where your audience is. And then the next thing for people who have small budgets and small teams, and we're all there. So, the Twitter marketing team in Canada is only 2 people. So just to put it in perspective, it's a very lean team I work on as well. The next thing is to start with a content calendar and be really clear up front of what you want to share and when you want to share it. So I always say you should tweet every day, multiple times a day, but that's not realistic for most people. And quite honestly, it's not realistic for me, even though I work at Twitter. I sometimes don't even get to look at the platform until basically the evening because I'm too busy. So if you have a content calendar and you know what your themes are going to be, your content pillars, it's a lot easier to then come up with a content calendar. And for those crazy busy times when you know you can't get to it or you're understaffed or under-resourced, is to then have some evergreen content written and ready to go. So then that way you can just kind of pick it out of an Excel spreadsheet, pop in the image that you want or the short video and share it out. But the thing is that, start by listening, have a content plan, have a content calendar and content themes, but you also really need to be engaging with individuals. So all of the social platforms are not a one-way conversation channel at all. If you wanted to have a one-way conversation, you could just get a print ad or a billboard or whatever. You can't talk to a billboard, but you can talk to somebody on Twitter. And so that's really important, as well as to make sure that there's certain amounts of time set aside in the day to just quickly look at the account and see if there's anyone who's interacting with you. Because, and I've been in marketing for almost 20 years, and I'm a marketer at heart. But I actually believe that if someone has a customer care issue, there's a problem that they have a question for you. It does not matter how big your marketing team is or how much money you spend on it. You will not change that person's point of view by ignoring them. So make sure, regardless, that you have time set aside in the day, and it could just be 5 minutes in the morning, lunch, and at the end of the day, to have a quick look at what people are saying and to interact with them in a meaningful way.
I think that's some really great advice. Definitely the overarching theme from this whole presentation has been about, you know, campaigns. The most successful campaigns on Twitter are obviously the most authentic ones. Mm-hmm. And so the next question that we have is do you have any specific recommendations how someone might be authentic, or some examples of, you know, maybe messages from companies that have been like more not so appropriate on the Twitter platform?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, you know, we all work at, you know, when you're finished school, you will work at a company, you'll be sitting, hopefully we'll be back in a boardroom, but sitting around, and you'll work hopefully with a diverse group of people. And so that's one of the things I think is really, really important, is that your voice is heard, because you see things differently as a younger person, or somebody maybe with different ethnicity, different cultural background, maybe a different language that you bring, is to make sure that that is being heard, and that your voice is being heard. Because I'm a big believer that, you know, as my background from a little small town, but now living in a big city, I've got a very sheltered view of the world. But my teams that I work on are very diverse. And so that's one way to avoid like stumbling into a bottomless pit, is to make sure that you've kind of tested the message with a few different people on the team, and to make sure that it doesn't feel cringy. You kind of know in the back of your head, like, oh, if this was seen by this person, how would they feel? Now, I'm not saying to just be like vanilla and safe all the time. I think that you really do need to take risks, but you need to take risks in a way that feel very calculated and very smart to what your brand stands for. So the Nike example that I think everybody goes back to with Colin Kaepernick, I think it worked so well because they actually had him as a Nike athlete for, I want to say, a full year before they came out with their campaign talking about change. And Nike stood behind him in, you know, not a lot of brands would have maybe stayed the course with him. In the first 24 hours that the Nike campaign came out featuring Colin Kaepernick, people were literally burning their Nike shoes and their Nike socks. Some of them actually had their feet still in them, so in questioning like their ability to understand like safety. But, you know, when you looked at it from a bit of a distance, their stock price went up. They sold more apparel. People's perception of Nike really did change. And then when the next campaign came out featuring Serena Williams and her kind of perspective of being a mom and being the best tennis player ever, was really felt aligned with what their brand stands for. Versus, and again, I'm not poking fun of the general, and I'm not poking fun of Pepsi, but I think we all remember that TV commercial, which just felt gross. You know, here she is, there's a protest happening. She breaks through and hands a police officer dressed in like a SWAT uniform a Pepsi, and all of a sudden the protest stops. Like, to me, that, you know, in no way does that feel real. And so, yeah, of course, a lot of stuff is staged in commercials and TV shoots. I totally get that. But if you think it through a little bit more, and you think, you know, how are people really going to feel? And you still have that question, it's probably not the right campaign to go out with. So, you know, those are two kind of examples. They're the big ones that everybody has heard of. There are a lot of really small companies who are doing amazing work, though, too. So I don't want you to think that I'm just going to talk about big companies, because not everybody's a Nike, not everyone's a Pepsi. But like the meaningful stuff that CIBC did just very, very quietly at the beginning of the pandemic, where they were giving back to frontline workers, where they changed their Run with a Cure and really made it fun for people to participate virtually. It's stuff like that, which are little things that make a lot of sense. Or even Adidas coming out with their sneakers and their apparel for Terry Fox's 40th anniversary of the Marathon of Hope. Really phenomenal campaign, super aligned with Adidas because they actually gave him running shoes when he was running across Canada. So again, if you think about how could they have approached it, what else could they have done except to really Terry's legacy and the legacy that he's brought to Canada. So it's very much about being aligned with what your brand stands for and making sure that it's not a flash in the pan, but it's something that you can actually sustain over time, which Nike has definitely done with their recent campaigns.
Oh, awesome. I think that's some really good advice. Before we get into kind of co-op grad like hiring questions, there's just one more question about any tips for someone starting maybe a hockey or sports blog and trying to use Twitter to promote and grow the audience. How might they do that kind of most effectively?
Yeah, so that's great. You want to start your own blog. That's super fun. Blogs are great. So I encourage you to keep at it. So we know sports conversation on Twitter is crazy. Hockey Twitter is on fire, and it's on fire with all kinds of stuff. Even though NHL isn't happening right now, the hockey conversation is one of the top trending topics every single week on Twitter in Canada. And that can be anything from people getting excited about the World Juniors to the throwback of the retro uniforms that the NHL and Adidas just came out with. But the conversation is crazy and it's on fire. So my biggest recommendation to you is to set up a list on Twitter. It's really, really easy to do. Or you can actually start to follow a whole bunch of people who are sports influencers. I'm just going to talk about hockey because I understand hockey a little bit better than some of the other sports. But people like Tim and Sid, you can follow all the NHL players. You can follow coaches. You can follow journalists. You can follow influencers. Set that all up on Twitter so you can see what their conversation is. And you can start to interact with people. You can retweet their content. We also, there's also ability to, of course, link your blog to Twitter. That's super easy to do with a link posted in it. But I think it's a matter of like, how do you stay on top of the conversation in real time? And one of the free tools that Twitter offers is called TweetDeck. It's tweetdeck.com. And you can set up columns in it. So think of it as basically this big giant warehouse of information, and it's set up in columns. So you can like track like all NHL players for the Ottawa Senators, and then all journalists and all journalists in Canada. And, you know, and you just can organize it so it's super easy to see. And then when you see people interacting with like whatever the big news is of the moment, then you can actually then start to engage with them. Just start by following these people and then making sure your bio is set up that they recognize what they will get from following you back, which is going to be sports commentary, sports information. So I think it's really awesome you're doing this, and there's so much you can do with Twitter, but start with TweetDeck so you can organize the conversation and listen to what's happening, and then engage with individuals, follow them, give their tweets a like, retweet their content with, you know, pithy little quote remarks, and then start to promote your blog. But good luck. It's super exciting you're doing that.
Amazing. Before we wrap up, we just have a couple questions about like co-op or new grad programs at Twitter, if those are available, and what kind of skills or what might you do kind of like to help your application stand out should you apply to those?
Yeah, certainly. So Twitter does hire interns every single year. We hire interns throughout the year. Our Canada office is really teeny tiny, so I don't think we have any open intern roles right now, but we have had interns in the past from U of T. If you're looking for a career at Twitter, whether it's an internship or a full-time role once you do graduate, all the information is available at careers.twitter.com. So that's careers.twitter.com, and you can easily apply online. if you are a Canadian citizen or you are an international student who's living in Canada attending school, Twitter does hire from Canada. Actually, our head of engineering is a Canadian guy. He's a really nice guy. And we hire a lot of engineering students. We hire marketers from Canada. We hire people in finance, HR, and we have a big sales team. So the roles that are often for people who are just starting out from university, it depends on what your background is. We even have people in operations that are fresh hires. The best way, quite honestly, to get a full-time job at Twitter is to have an internship, and the way to get your resume to stand out is really, and again, I've hired a lot of people, is I look at what people's volunteer work is. I don't expect a university student to have much job experience. I mean, how could you? You've been in school all of your life. So it's not realistic for me to say, oh, I want somebody who's got 3 years marketing experience at the biggest companies in the world. I mean, you've been studying. So whenever I look at people's resumes and how they stand out for a role I'd be hiring, which would be in a marketing job, is I look at what type of marketing experience have they had. And it's okay if it's volunteer work, because I want to see that this person shows initiative, that they show interest in the marketing profession, and that they're at least have had some experience in running social accounts at another organization. And quite honestly, the other organization could be at a women's shelter, or it could be as, you know, marketing club at the university, or it could be, you know, a sports team that you're part of. It doesn't have to be a company. But I'm always looking for somebody who's got a little tiny bit. And again, volunteer work is a great way to get it. I'm a big believer in giving back, and I support a lot of like women's groups. And I actually volunteer regularly to do social accounts and to give social media coaching to a number of different charities and not-for-profits. I just do that in the evenings, my weekends, whenever I've got a few free minutes, because it's important to give back. But all these organizations need help. So if you are thinking like, where do I volunteer? Quite honestly, just reach out to anyone that it's an interest group that you care about. So, I mean, I volunteer at the Humane Society because I love animals, and I help them a ton with a lot of their marketing. So it's just a way that you can show your interest in the profession.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Michelle. I have to say, this was a really amazing presentation, and we appreciate so much you setting aside this time to like be with us and walk us through what it means to market on Twitter. So a big thank you from all of us that have attended today. I'm going to hand it back to Anurag to just close out the session. But yeah, thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you, Amelia. And thank you so much, Michelle. It was amazing to hear about all of these campaigns that we've seen over the past couple of years on Twitter. It was fascinating to learn about some of the stories that are behind these brands. Any last words, Michelle, before we close?
I just wanted to say thank you again for everyone for the last 90 minutes. I know it's a busy time of the year for you. I just want to wish you all the very best over the holiday season. Good luck with any exams you have coming up. And if there's anything I can do to help you, please do reach out. I can be, as I said, found on Twitter or found on LinkedIn, but I do wish you all the very best. And thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Michelle. And thanks to everyone else who joined us today. This was our last hashtag session for 2020. We have some really exciting things planned for 2021, and we hope you all continue to engage with marketing industry leaders through the hashtag platform. Have a great day, and I hope you all have a restful holiday season. See you in the next year.